Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Kidlit Distancing Social. I'm Laura Backus, publisher of Children's Book Insider, and I'm your host for the evening. And I am really happy to have our guest here tonight, Debbie Dadey. We're going to have a really great chat starting in just a couple minutes. But I have a small announcement. So we have been the Kidlit Distancing Social for since beginning of April of 2020. Almost 15 months. Starting next week, we're going to be the Kidlit Social. We're taking distancing out of the title. And I'm really happy that we're able to do that, start to acknowledge that life is starting to return to normal or the new normal for most of us. And for those of you who aren't quite there yet, I really hope you will be there soon. But anyway, Kidlit Social starting next week. And we're going to have a couple other little changes coming up, but we will announce those as they are relevant to you. So I know I have some new people here tonight, and I'm sure we'll have a lot of new people watching on the replay. So if you are interested in getting on our list and finding out about everything we do, including our upcoming guests for the Kidlit Distancing Social, you can go to writeforkids.org/ultimate-cheat sheet. You will get on our list, and you also get a free ebook called the Ultimate Children's Writing Cheat Sheet. This is our 31st year in business, and this ebook compiles kind of our best beginner tips from those 31 years into one handy reference for you if you want to get started writing for kids. So that is yours to get on our list. And if you are interested in our newsletter, Children's Book Insider, which is celebrating its 31st anniversary this year of publication, we have a special offer for our socialites, writeforkids.org/CBI. And it's $5 a month delivered to your inbox. It's about 20 pages a month, average. We have market information, how-to articles, interviews with authors, editors, agents, all kinds of great stuff for you every month. We also have one special above the slush submission opportunity from either an editor or an agent with a special code for our subscribers that you get to use to jump over the slush pile when you submit to that person. And access to our CBI Clubhouse, which is the online companion website membership site, which houses lots of that 31 years worth of information. So $5 a month. Great deal. So normally I have a celebrate section right now where you send me your good news and I help you celebrate it on the Kidlit Distancing Social. But I didn't have any celebrates this week. I know you're all busy having a great summer. You're going on vacation. A lot of you just got your kids graduated. We're going into wedding season. John and I are going to be going to a wedding in a couple of weeks. So I get it. Things are slowing down writing-wise right now, but don't forget us. We want to celebrate with you. So if you have any great news, send it to me at mail@writeforkids.org and put celebrate in the subject line, and I will feature your news on a future Kidlit Distancing Social. No celebration is too small, and I mean that sincerely. Any step you've taken in your writing journey, we want to help you celebrate. So now here I get to bring on my guest. Around the Write for Kids offices, we often refer to our friend Debbie Dadey as the Queen of Chapter Books, and I'm not even joking about that. She's authored or co-authored over 180 books in 12 different series. That's my count. I may have missed one or two in there. And by my count, has 9 single titles, including middle grade YA and a guide for writers called Story Sparkers. Her Adventures of the Bailey School Kids series, which she co-authored with Marsha Thornton Jones, is one of Scholastic's top 3 best-selling series of all time, with 42 million copies sold. And the newest release of her Mermaid Tales series, Sleepover in the Haunted Mansion, at the Haunted Mansion, was just released on June 15th. Her the very newest book coming up is the graphic novel version of the original Bailey School Kids title, Vampires Don't Wear Polka Dots, which will be published by the graphics imprint at Scholastic on August 3rd. So here is just a sampling of her titles. You need to go to her website and see everything she's written because there was too much to put on one slide. But one of the coolest things that I learned when I was at her site is that her grandmother, going back 77 generations, was Cleopatra. So the Queen of Chapter Books is a very appropriate title for Debbie Dadey. So Debbie, come on and let's chat.
Hi.
Hello, welcome.
Hi. Thanks for that introduction.
I'm so happy. Sure. And at some point, we should devote an entire webinar to how you traced your family history.
Well, that's
so
if you
far
can
back.
believe Ancestry.com.
to know who
It
you're
was
related
just
to
fun.
all the way back. You had a lot of really interesting relatives listed on your website from like there was some Civil War people, I think, or I can't remember, but you had a lot of interesting connections throughout your family.
One of my ancestors wrote, we just had Flag Day, and so I was speaking at a kids program about Flag Day, and I had to tell him one of my ancestors was Francis Scott Key, who wrote the Star Spangled Banner.
You're taking up all the famous people.
Was in my genes a little bit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wow. I don't think I have anybody quite that impressive in my family tree.
You never know.
You never know. I might have to start digging a little farther. Well, great. Well, I'm so glad to have you here, and I'm so glad to focus on chapter books tonight because I really love chapter books as a genre, as a readership. I just think they're really fun, and I imagine. Well, I really appreciate people who can write them well because I think it's a very specific skill. You've got a real specific age group that you're targeting there. And so I love great chapter books for kids. But a lot of our viewers who are new to writing for children might not realize that chapter books is a very distinct age category and a sort of set of, into themselves, didn't really exist for quite a while in children's publishing. I started in publishing in the mid-'80s, and we were just starting to see really designated chapter book series. I mean, before that, we had a couple. We had Encyclopedia Brown, and we had David Adler's Nate the Great, and Marjorie Weinman's Charmant's. No, she did Nate the Great. David Adler did Cam Jansen. Anyway, the interesting thing is they were all kid detectives, which it seemed like that was sort of the characters you had to write about. And then Patricia Riley Giff came along with her Kids of the Polk Street School, and I wanted to spend a moment talking about her because she passed away last week, and she was such a lovely person and contributed so much to Kidlit. And her Kids of the Polk Street School series chapter books really sort of put school stories on the map, I think, for this age group, and like everyday kids and stuff that they were going through was okay to write about, and she did it with such humor and so well. And I wondered when you were starting out, because your Bailey Street Kids series debuted in 1990, so you were a little after her. Did she influence you at all? Did you study her books? Did you read Patricia Riley Giff's work as you were kind of educating yourself?
I was a first grade teacher, and then I became a school librarian. And yes, she definitely influenced me because I saw a real need for kids books for kids in that age, second and third grade range. There are tons of picture books, tons of novels, but at that time, the wind was blowing the tumbleweed through the chapter book area. There wasn't anything, and a lot of kids just weren't ready for the big
Mhm.
book that they wanted because the novels were just too hard. And so she was one of the few that fit that bill. And I thought there needed to be more. So hers were a little bit easier than what
Absolutely.
we were writing. The
Mhm.
Polk Street kids are a little bit easier than the Bailey School kids, but around that same
Mhm.
time, the kids in my school were practically fighting over this one set of books about how you made different monster movies. And I'm like, okay, there
Uh,
needs to be more books, chapter books. And these kids love monsters. And so my friend Marsha and I both had that in our heads that, that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to write books on that level because there was a need. And hey, kids really like monsters. So what about a monster?
right, exactly, exactly. It's not that complicated really when you think about it, but it's amazing to me how often authors, when they're conceiving of a series, they don't keep it simple like that. I mean, you have these great, a lot of your series are sort of school based, and the kids are dealing, they're based, the kids are dealing with real kid type situations, but then you have this layer on top that's the monsters, or like Mermaid Academy, they happen to be mermaids, or I mean mermaid tales, going to Trident Academy. And so I love that you give it just that little extra hook that makes it really interesting and yet still very relatable, I think, to the readers.
Yeah,
So when you're
I can't remember who it
conceiving of your
was.
series ideas,
Yeah,
you think about that.
somebody said, was it Bruce Coville said first you have to hit kids over the head to get their attention, and then hopefully they'll read your story. So yeah, I agree that you do kind of have to have a hook to hopefully get at least some kids. Some kids are going to read anything, but a lot of
Mhm.
kids need a little extra motivation. And if it's monster, that's great. I think
Yeah,
that's a great
sure.
thing. Anything that will
Why
bring kids
not?
to books is a wonderful thing.
Absolutely. So again, for there's a lot of people who are fairly new to Kidlit or to writing for kids, and they might not understand all the differences between a true middle grade novel and a chapter book. And there's kind of two levels of chapter books. There's that younger end, like the Polk Street kids, which are sort of 6 to 9, and then there's the Bailey School kids, were 7 to 10. Is that correct? Sort of the age designation, which are just a
Kind of
little bit
flexible.
older. We're talking sort of the difference between second grade and third grade. I mean, it's nuanced, but and it allows kids to kind of step gradually from those easy readers into eventually middle grade. But there's other writing differences, aren't there? I mean, besides just the fact that they're shorter than a middle grade novel. What are some other considerations when you're writing chapter books?
Well, I had a child tell me one day never to have a chapter over 3 pages. That was it. That's all he could take. Three. So I try to stick with that. Of course, you're going to use words that aren't as difficult, while not talking
Sure.
down. Just keep your vocabulary second, third grade level, which works well for me because that's my level.
Mhm.
I've got that in my brain. I'm on a third grade mentality. But
Yeah.
um, so of course you want to have things that appeal to that age level, and school, pets, those are all things that kids that age are gonna love. But you also I guess you always want to make sure to have action, and I think middle grade needs action, but chapter books, you can't have any introspection, or at least not much. And it's got to be action, action,
Right,
action oriented. and
right.
and every end of chapter needs to have that hook to get you into the next chapter. And I always try to do that. So those are some thoughts.
Yeah. Yes, definitely the action is key. Like you said, not a lot of introspection. Do you worry about subplots, or do you try to keep it all pretty much on one main plot level?
Well, with my new series, the Mermaid Tale book, um, I had an arc, like the first 4 books, there was an arc, and then that same arc extended to the next 4 books, and then that same arc finished to with the next 4 books. But it's basically one plot line, but you might have an overarching plot, like a background plot that goes through
Sure.
some of the long, kind of long term throughout the books, but mostly you're focusing on that one main plot line.
Right.
And I think keeping in mind that kids this age really do like series. I think everybody likes a series. I know myself, for adult books, I like to read. I look for that same author, and if he or she's done a series, I'm going to probably read, everything in that series. But and I think kids are the same, and I think librarians love it because they know. Okay, every book by, hopefully, Debbie Dadey, they're going to buy, which would be great.
Right.
Recommend it. But they're safe because we know what to expect. A kid knows what to expect. When they pick up a Mermaid Tale book, they know what to expect. They feel comfortable. They know the characters. They hopefully love the characters, and maybe they relate to one of the characters more than another. I visited a school in Evansville, Indiana, one time, and there was a kid out in the hall crying, and the teacher was trying to console the kid, and the librarian told me, he's crying because you came. I went, that doesn't make me feel very good. She said, he's crying because you came and not your characters. He was expecting the characters to come visit because they were real to him.
They were so real.
So I think that's part of the love and the appeal of chapter books and series, that you can get to know the characters and kids get to feel like they're their best friends, sort of.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that's so touching and so sad at the same time.
I was like, oh, I felt bad, but then I was like, oh, I kind of feel good.
Yeah, I know. You did your job so well that you broke his heart. Not really.
I always wanted to write a book that would make people cry. Somebody told me one book that I wrote called Whistler's Hollow did that. So I'm like, okay, maybe I did it.
Oh, yes. So what do you think it is about your characters that kids get so attached to? Do you try to base them on, like, for example, kids you know, or aspects of kids you've known, or yourself, or do you how do you make them so real to your readers?
Well, I taught school for 11 years. I don't know if that helped or not. I think it did, because you meet a lot of interesting young people when you teach school, and the ones, of course, that stick in your head the longest are the ones that you probably want to write a little bit about, some of their characteristics. But I think you also take a little bit of yourself, because I was kind of a tomboy, so that's Melody. I like to read, so that's Liza. I like learning things, so that's Hallie. So my mom said I did just enough not to get in trouble. So that was kind of Eddie. So those characters in the Bailey School Kids were a little bit a part of me. So I think you have to take, your own self and put it on the page, kind of spill your guts on the page there of what it was like when you were a kid. And I think we can all kind of remember. And I think when you start writing scenes and you put yourself into that scene, it kind of brings back your childhood and how you would have reacted. And I think trying to be real and not like pretty or clean makes a difference.
Sure. So your characters are not perfect, is what you're saying. They have flaws, and which is what makes them interesting, and it also allows them to get into trouble, which is part of what makes the book fun to read.
And the most success I've ever had in writing is taking chances, and not maybe Eddie does do something over the top, and that's a chance that you take in a story. And should you take that chance, it's up to you.
Right.
I think Diane said something about how do I keep kids separate and like their personalities separate. Well, I think you, if you have too many characters, it's kind of hard. So the most I ever do is 4. I think 4 is, I can't imagine keeping 4 any more
Right.
than 4 main characters straight. So that's my limit. But I do keep what's called a series Bible, and this is my series Bible for the Bailey School kids. And basically, I have like sections for each kind of thing that I'm doing. Oh no, this is for the Mermaid Tale. Sorry, this is like I tell about each character, and then whenever I add a character to a new story, I tell about them, and so I keep it all in my series Bible. I have charts for like what color the tails are, what food they ate in each a certain book. So I try to keep it organized so that in like if I have them living in a certain place in book 3, I don't want them living in a different place in book 10 unless I have them move. So I try to keep things straight that way. And I even have a map that I add to of like where things are. I drew the map that the illustrator used to illustrate the book and put in the book, but then I add to it as events in the story lead up to it. But I actually, here's the Bible for the Bailey School kids. So I do the same thing. I have character sketches. These are like the first character sketches from 1990 when we first, 1988 when I first wrote the book. It took a year and a half for the book to come out in 1990. So then of course we just added more characters, and I added more sketches to my my Bible, my series Bible. So I think keeping stuff organized and writing everything down and is a great way to keep organized and know your characters. When I did my new series, well, actually I have a new series coming out next year. It's called Mermaid Mini. I'm not sure the exact title. It's either going to be Mermaid Mini Tales or Mini Mermaid Tales. So it's going to be some mermaids who are younger, like for second graders.
Right.
But when I did my Mermaid Tale series for 6 months, I worked on the world building of what the characters were going to be like, how they were going to live, what they were going to eat, what they were going to write on, because you can't write on paper underneath the ocean, but they were going to use kelp, and of course they'd use quill pens because there's a sea quill that so my editor actually had me do that for 6 months, going back and forth before I even started writing the stories.
Wow.
So that's kind of how
and with so many well, and because you've written so many series, you have to keep them straight. I don't know how you could possibly hold that all in your brain. You definitely need those Bibles. So that's interesting because you had a Bailey Street Kids junior chapter books, right? That was sort of a spin-off of the original Bailey School Kids. Sorry, I have Polk Street in my head. Bailey School Kids. So that was sort of taking those characters younger as well for the younger chapter book sets. So I think that's really interesting that now you're able to do that again with your Mermaid Tales. Do you think it's because younger kids see their older siblings reading these books and go, I want them too? What do you think is driving the market for these younger ones, spin-offs?
Well, I was delighted when they did the Bailey School Kids Junior chapter book because they were easier, but they looked very similar. And so kids who couldn't read as well could read books that looked just like the harder books. And they felt great about reading books that looked just like them, but they were more on their level. Yeah. So I thought that was a wonderful thing. With the Mermaid's Tales, I think it's little girls like mermaids and little girls beg for this hard book with mom and dad, and mom and dad say, no, that's too hard for you. And so it'll be nice that they have an easier option. I think that maybe was driving the market a little bit. Sure. I see Mary Jo lives close to where I grew up, and I grew up in Henderson, Kentucky. And actually, in August, I think I'm going to go back to Evansville and do a book signing at the Barnes and Noble there. So hopefully I'll see you, Mary Jo.
Awesome. Mary Jo, you can pop in. Great. That's great. So I want one more question about series, then we're going to talk about your graphic novel here. Um, but you co-author a lot of your work with Marsha Thornton Jones, and I wanted to ask a little bit about what that's like working with a co-author. Obviously, you must like it. You've been doing it a long time. You two must work really well together. How does the writing work? How do you maneuver all that?
Well, Marcia and I taught at the same school. I was a first grade teacher. Actually, I followed her. We were like, it was like destiny. She taught at this one school, and then she left to go to another school. And I came and started teaching the same grade. I took over her position, first grade position at that school. And at the next school that she went to, she decided she wanted to be a reading specialist and computer lab teacher. So she went to do that and left first grade. And I went and took her first grade position at that school. So I was like hounding her, trying to catch up with her. And so we got to be friends, and we were just chatting one day and said, I've always wanted to write a children's book. And I went, oh, me too. And I'd actually written this really terrible children's book at that point, where I had drawn the pictures of stick line figures and everything. It was really bad. But the very next day we sat down and we started writing stories together. And what we did was we would brainstorm, and then we would kind of come up with a plan. And I always work from an outline. I think about, chapter by chapter, like a sentence or two that's going to happen in each chapter. So I basically know for my book that comes out next year, I knew what was going to happen. Actually, I have 5 books coming out next year. That's for a while there, we had 12 books coming out every year, Marcia and I. So that's why we had to work from an outline. We would actually plan out the outline of a little bit of what would happen in each chapter. And then we would send it to our editor and say, what do you think about this? And if she hated, chapter 2 and 3, we would change it. And that way we could write a lot faster, because when we were writing 12 books a year, you had to be able to write fast. So I think writing series helped me to write faster. I don't know if it helped me to write better, but it did help me to be able to write faster. I know that. But we kind of tossed the chapters back and forth. Like a lot of times I would start and do 1 or 2 chapters, and then I would toss them or email them, or that was before email when we first started. I would send it to Marcia or give it to Marcia and say, okay, your turn. And she would read over what I had done and make some suggestions. And then she would do the next 2 chapters, and she'd kind of hot potato it back to me, and I would do the same thing. And we were kind of each other's editors that way for a while. When we first started writing, we would actually sit down and do it together, but then I moved away, and that kind of forced us to have to do the hot potato thing where we went back and forth like that. So I think when you have somebody like that to support you, it was very helpful, because we got a lot of rejections. And I think everybody who writes, if you don't get a lot of rejections, you're very lucky, because most people do. And it's very depressing, sort of, and makes you want to quit. But she wasn't quitting, and I wasn't going to quit if she wasn't going to quit, because I would be too embarrassed. So we kind of buoyed each other up and kept each other going. And now we do write separately, but we've been working on that upcoming graphic novel together, and we have another graphic novel coming out next year, and knock on wood, we'll see how the first 2 do, and we'll see if there'll be another graphic novel.
Awesome. So I keep saying it's my last series question, but I've got one more, because I know we have a lot of people here who are curious about how series are written. Do you plot out sort of the first several books of a series so you kind of know where you're going? And is that what you present to the editor as well, so that they have a sense of how you envision the series?
Well, usually to start a series, you're lucky if they buy maybe 3 or 4 books. A lot of times they start out with 2, and you're lucky if they buy 4. With my new series for next year, they bought 8. I went, really? Wow, that was great. But what I do, because I want them to buy more, I give them ideas for like 10 books. So maybe they won't buy all 10, but maybe they'll find, maybe if they're planning on buying 2, maybe they'll just say, oh, that's good, let's buy 4. So I always try to give them more than they want,
Mhm.
so that they will be, hopefully buy more than they were planning. But what I do is if it's like, if I'm doing like a brand new series and I wanted to do a series proposal, I would, some people, if you're brand new, you would have to write the whole book, the whole first book. But you might, if you've published before, you'd probably want to just write a chapter or 2 and
Mhm.
give an outline for the first book. And then you would give synopsis, like a paragraph, for however many books
Mhm.
you think you want to write.
Yeah.
And some series are more open-ended. Um, you don't want to limit yourself, because a school-based series can be very open-ended.
Mhm.
Anything can happen, right? But some series might be a little bit trickier, like I don't know, I'm just pulling something out of the air, like a baseball team. Um, if it's just about the baseball team, then it might be limiting. But if you have it, about a school and a baseball is one of the activities, then that is more open-ended.
Sure.
So you have to have a lot of um, story possibilities. So
Mhm.
you can't think of 8 stories to go along with your idea, then it might not be a long-running
Right.
series.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and I think that's often the difference between a chapter book series and say, a young adult series. A lot of young adult series are more written as, say, trilogies. There's a plot that has a clear beginning, middle, and end that arcs over the entire series, and then it's done. Whereas chapter books, it's much more open ended, and I think it's because younger kids just get so hooked on these series, and that's all they want to read. They just want more, 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 which is great. So,
The reading, that's the important
and
thing.
they're
Yeah.
reading exactly.
And some librarians, especially when I was a librarian, there were some librarians who thought it was oh horrible to have series books in their library. So I went into a new library and there were no series books at all in the whole
Hmm.
library. There were all these ancient, dirty looking books. There was nothing new and nothing shiny. And of course, what did I do? I went in and bought every. I mean, they didn't even have like the boxcar children. I mean, wow. So, but I went in and bought a bunch of series, and guess what? Circulation went way up. So,
I bet.
I think you have to realize that kids don't want to read War and Peace, for
No.
fun, and just like we don't want to.
Yeah.
So they have to have something, all kinds of material
All
available
kinds
to
of
them.
material. And
Yeah.
there is that familiarity that is comforting, especially when you're just embracing sort of short novels for the first time as a reader. And then you have it feels less intimidating, I think, to know, oh, these are the characters I'm going to read about. Here's where it's going to take place. I know what I'm getting into. And I bet that's part of it for some readers for sure. So let's talk about your graphic novel. I actually want to show a couple pages on the screen here. I'm going to screen share again. And I want to remind you all, if you have questions for Debbie, please put them in the Q&A, and we will get to them in just a few minutes. So here, where am I? I'm right here. And I want to go to the next page. So for your original Vampires Don't Wear Polka Dots from the Bailey School Kids series, book one, this was your first chapter. And this is the book that you have converted into a graphic novel. So I just want everybody to look at all those words on the page, all those very carefully written words that I'm sure you took a long time, Debbie, to make sure they were just right, you and Marcia. And then here is the essentially get the same amount of story in the graphic novel. And as you can see, there's far fewer words on the page. It's all dialogue. And the story is shown, a lot of it, through the illustrations. So what was this like, Debbie, kind of creating creating this from your original, and how did you choose what to leave in and what to leave out?
Well, what happened was my agent said graphics, which is a branch of Scholastic that does graphic novels, they want to do a graphic novel of the vampires don't wear polka dots. And Marsha and I went, yay, that sounds great. And they selected illustrator named Pearl Lowe. And I think she actually won an Oscar.
Wow.
So she's great. But one of the first things they did was they gave us a character lineup. And I was shocked because the characters were nothing like the characters in the original. As you can see,
Gotcha.
this is the very first
Mhm. The cover, yeah, of the first
cover.
book.
There's been about I guess there were three covers very similar to this one, and then it went to this. But you can see there's quite a difference in the characters.
Yes.
Um, and I was shocked. I was like, what? How can this be? They're so different. They're changing the whole story. But then I kind of accepted it and like, I think it's good. We're bringing the Bailey School kids. We're bringing more diversity because Melody was really our only diverse character in the Bailey School kids. And so we're bringing more diversity, which was wonderful. And Pearl Lowe is, she is Asian, part Black, I think. So she was coming from her own experiences and bringing her own ideas. She's, I think, Canadian as well. So she's brought a whole, whole new range of experiences to it. So first I was shocked, then I was like, I think this is a good thing. So, and I think it'll appeal to, a whole new generation because kids like to see themselves in books, and that was always something I strove to do, to let kids be able to see themselves in the book. I think that's an important thing. And going back to what you said, maybe the reason why they like a certain book is because they can see themselves in a book. And can identify with them. So what happened was Pearl took our manuscript and she wrote a pared down script from it. And then they sent us something that looked kind of like this. And I was like, well, what is this? So then Jonah Newman and the good people at graphics were so wonderful. They said, okay, what do you think of these words? And they let us give our comments, and they made almost everything that we asked for. They changed. So we didn't work directly with Pearl, who did the adaptation, but we worked with the editors, and they were kind of the go-between between Pearl and Marsha and myself. So we I guess that way maybe they were afraid we were going to fight with each other. I don't know, but I don't think so. She's a very nice person. But it was very interesting trying to take like the meat of what happened in each chapter and boil it down. And people used to call me the slasher when in critique groups, because I would do that. I would say, oh, you don't need this. You don't need that. That's too much. That's too much. And I guess it's kind of like that. You're just slashing away all the extra meat and going down to the nitty gritty of what is important to say, because you can say in of course, here's the graphic novel. You can, this is like a sample. It's not the whole thing. You have to just pare it down to the most important thing to say, and then you can show the rest in pictures, because there's a lot more, obviously, more pictures in this than there were in the original.
Yeah.
Because in the original chapter book, there was only like one line drawing maybe per chapter. So there were very few black and white drawings. So this is kind of fun to have all the color and
it is,
yeah.
Well, and it occurred to me that for a writer, what a terrific way to study how to write a graphic novel, to get both your original version and the graphic novel and read them side by side and see what was left out but still is conveyed subtly in the graphic novel through the illustrations. I was thinking about like the characters. So much of the original, you've got these characters, you've got their dialogue. A lot of what's surrounding the characters, surrounding the dialogue, is the character's body language, the reactions by the other characters, what the character might be doing while they're talking. And that gives us all these clues into who they are. And in the graphic novel, you just had the dialogue in the text. So the illustrator had to fill in all the rest with the illustration. Do you feel that the characters remained pretty true to themselves in the graphic novel version?
Yes, one of the things that uh, Howie, when they were redesigning the characters, Howie looked so different than what we had imagined, because he's indigenous in the new graphic novel, and he was quite different in the original. He was just a clean cut little blonde haired boy. Here he's on closest to me. I can't figure out how to point to him. But he's quite different, but he was very interested in science. So we said, we have to make sure he still has his personality. So they gave him like a t-shirt or sweatshirt with something to do with science on it. So because we wanted to, even though they can have a different nationality or I can't get the word out.
Yeah, sure.
What's the word I'm looking for?
Different physicality, but
Yeah,
who they are as a character still
yeah,
remains.
needed to be. And so she did stay true to their characterizations, their what they liked and what they didn't like, and I think that is for the most part. So she did do that, and I think that was what was important. And what I've always tried to write are kind of softly diverse stories, and I think this is the way the graphic novel is as well. They're softly diverse, that we don't dwell on their differences; they just are.
Right, right. Just like real life.
Yeah. Hopefully, yeah.
Hopefully like real life. Yes, exactly. Well, that's interesting. So yeah, I am going to read them side by side. I have read the advanced copy of your graphic novel, and I read the original like eons ago. And it just occurred to me what an interesting exercise that would be to really read them side by side. So once you all
Yeah,
do that, it'll be
Doris
fun.
said something about, isn't it now Pearl's book? And in a way, it is Pearl's book, but in a way, it's still our book. So it's kind of like a sharing kind of thing. It has been kind of interesting. Like,
Yes.
this is our baby, and 30 years later, you're putting new underwear on our baby. What's going on? So it was a shock at first, but it's interesting to see your baby get polished and shined up in a whole new way.
Well, and it's going to reach an entirely new set of readers now who might not have read the original in the chapter book form, but they're really into graphic novels, and so now they're going to pick up this one, which is great.
Well,
Um,
Jonah Newman at Graphics also pointed out that, our series first came out 30 years ago. So the kids who are going to be reading the graphic novel today probably maybe didn't read the original. So
yes, exactly.
it's like you said, it's
Their
a whole new
parents
crop
might
of
have.
kids.
Their
Every
parents.
2 years, there's a new crop of second and third graders. So
Absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely. So this experience was way more like what a picture book writer goes through, because a picture book is really a collaboration between the author and the illustrator, and the illustrator has so much more input as far as how the characters look and influencing, filling in the storyline, but the spaces between the words. And so in a way, your experience with the graphic novel was a little more like working on a picture book than previously, where you had just the line drawings, where I'm sure the illustrator drew exactly what the word said. Line drawings and chapter books do that. They're not really meant to expand on the story or fill in the gaps. So I think that's really interesting.
Actually, speaking of picture books, I just sold a picture book.
Oh,
The To Learner. It'll come out in 2023. And actually, I have a messy where I was working on it. Oh, here it is, right in front of me. It's tentatively called Curious Katie, the race for the COVID-19 vaccine, because it's a picture book biography about Caitlin Carrico,
that's
who
right.
for 40
I read
years
about that.
developed the mRNA technology that led to the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. So I just wanted to write about her so much. I read about her, I think around Christmas time, and she was so fascinating. And I said, somebody needs to write a book about her. And I'm like, well, I could do that. Maybe. And I did, luckily. So she was very gracious, and she answered interview questions. And so I'm looking
Great.
forward to that coming out, and I'll get to work with a new illustrator.
That's great. That is wonderful. Yes, I remember reading about that. That's awesome. Do you do anything but write? I mean, it seems like you have so many ideas. You're constantly cranking out all these new books. Um, and yet I know you have hobbies. I know you quilt. Is that correct? You're very
I like quilts,
you
but I
like
tried
quilt.
quilting one time, and I'm like, this is not for me.
Okay. So
Oh my gosh. You have to have a lot more patience than I have.
well, that makes
um,
me feel a little better because quilting is a very time-consuming hobby,
oh,
and I thought, how could she possibly do that as well? But I know that you collect quilts. Is that true, or you have quite a few quilts? You
well,
have
actually, my grandmother and my mother left me some lovely quilts, so
okay,
those are where
okay.
I actually have a quilt that was made before the Civil War that my mom gave me, that's passed down through the generations, and it's a
Wow.
beautiful quilt. So yeah, I do appreciate quilts, and I really appreciate them because I'm not going to make them. That's just not going to happen.
Yes. But I mean, I'm sure people are wondering how many hours a day do you spend writing, or do you have a schedule? How are you so productive?
Well, I've been writing for 30, a little over 30 years. So you write 3 pages a day for 30 years, you're bound to write a lot of stuff. So
Mhm.
I like to write 3 pages a day,
Okay.
or review 3 pages a day. That's my goal. Some people have this goal of time, and that doesn't always work for me. Uh, Especially when I was busy with my kids, and now it's my grandson. But I think if I can do 3 pages a day, I'm pretty happy with that, because that, for me, that's a whole chapter.
Yes. And by 3 pages a day, do you mean like really good pages? You get them down and then you go through and really tweak them, or is it just getting it on the paper and then you go back and edit later?
Yeah, getting it on the paper, and if I can edit it, then that would be great too. But my usually what I try to do is I try to do 3 pages a day, and then the next day I'll have that chapter to read, or those pages to read, and then that's when I go back in with fresh eyes, and I can see mistakes a little bit easier, because sometimes when you're doing it, it's so hard to find things that the
Mhm.
next day they're just like boing, like, oh my gosh, look at that mistake, but how can I do that? So it's easier to find for me. A lot of times I don't do this anymore, because I'm by 8 o'clock, I'm like, I said, it's past my bedtime already. I used to read it before I went to bed and make changes, and then I put those changes in the morning, but now I read it in the morning and put those changes in.
Yeah. Yeah. Good idea. My last question for you, and then I'm going to get to some of our attendees' questions here. Um, the chapter book age range, which can again be anywhere from like 6 to 9 to 7 to 10, it's so important to get the dialogue right for your characters so that the kids sound like they're actually kids, and the sense of humor. Um, and how do you kind of keep in touch with that? I know you were a teacher for a long time. Do you think that helped instill those voices in your head? Or is there anything else that helps you keep in touch with that?
Oh, I think being a teacher was bound to have helped. I guess it kind of got me in the correct mindset. But of course, reading other stories on that same level, whenever, like if I've been writing, like I'm also working on a middle grade novel right now. And if I'm going from that middle grade novel to work on something short chapter book, I have to like read something on that level to get
Mhm,
me in that mindset, because
mhm,
it's just, going from one level to another. I just need to get myself back into that mindset. So reading books on that level can get you, without studying it, just reading them gets you in that flow and thinking of what's appropriate without even trying. So
mhm.
I think reading lots of books on whatever level you want to read. If you're interested in writing on a certain level, read as many books as you can on that level, because it gets you thinking the way that you maybe
Right,
need to think. Yeah.
right. And I assume you avoid things like slang and things that are going to date the book. Your stories are very timeless, and that they can appeal to generations of kids. Do you worry about certain slang in your characters' talk, or do you have your kids refer to cell phones, for example, any kind of technology, anything like that?
Well, no, not really. Um, uh, they don't. But then, of course, when I first wrote this book, there was no, there weren't
No, but
cell
even your newer books, yeah, if the chapter books, yeah.
Well, and of course, my books that I'm working series that I'm two series I'm working on right now are mermaids, so they don't have cell phones.
Well, they
Although
could.
they wish they had a way to talk to somebody on the other side of the ocean. Wouldn't that be nice?
That would be great. I think again, that's a nice thing about working for that, writing for that younger age. Those kids are less likely to, if their characters they're reading about don't have a cell phone, it's not going to really register with them as much. Whereas if you're writing contemporary YA, you
They
have
need
to
a
put
cell phone.
technology
Yeah,
in it.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
So,
Although, it's getting younger and younger with kids with cell phones, but
yes, it is.
yeah,
It is
yeah.
absolutely. All right, well, let me get some of these questions here. I don't want to take up all your time. We have a question here. I'm having problems breaking my story into chapters. Some chapters are very long, some short. Is that a problem? And also, I cannot find a good place to break the story. So, first of all, you said that the chapter endings are important because you have to pull kids into the next chapter. What kinds of things do you try to put at the end of your chapters?
Well, I like cliffhangers, like, and her hand reached out and grabbed her.
Yeah.
End of chapter. Or uh, um, let's see. And the one I just went to a library today and read from chapter 4 of this book. And at the end of the chapter that I was reading, this happened. Shelley was stunned. So was every mergirl. They all screamed and ran and swam for their lives. So you have to read the next chapter to find out why they swam for their lives.
Wow.
So anything that makes you wonder or say, well, what happened next? Because that's what you want
Sure.
at the end of a chapter book chapter. You want to make it so the kid can't put the book down.
Mhm, mhm.
So it's 10 o'clock at night. They should have been in bed 2 hours ago sleeping. And there's something in that book that won't let them put it down.
Right.
So that's the kind of cliffhanger you want at the end of the chapter.
Mhm. And in chapter books in general, do you have sort of a word count in your head as far as the chapters, or is it more 3 scenes or 1 plot point? Or, how do you sort of judge how long a chapter should be?
Well, as I mentioned, I do an outline. And
Mhm,
so that little blurb, the one sentence or two sentences of what I said that's going to happen in that chapter, that is the outline for
mhm,
that chapter. So
mhm,
I know before I even start writing the first word in chapter 1, what's going to happen in each chapter of my book.
mhm,
So I have that plan, and I can I know people who write a very, very detailed long outline, and their outline is almost as long as their book. And I'm like, well, then why do you need to write the book? You've already basically written the book. So I keep my outline very simple so that I have room to play and have hopefully funny, silly,
Mhm.
scary, maybe things happen in this in each plan. But there have been places where I'll be writing a story and I'll say something funny happens here, but I
Mm,
don't know what. So
right.
I'll keep going, and then I'll brainstorm later, like what could happen here, or maybe it'll even occur to me as I'm going on, but I don't let it stop the flow
Mhm.
of the story. And then I'll go back and hopefully figure out different things that could be funny there, because I think you should have something funny in your story
Right.
somewhere. Hopefully, the more the better, because adventure and uh, humor are the two biggest draws, especially in this chapter book level, but in middle grade as well. That's what kids really, really like.
Mhm.
So if you can
Mhm.
do those two well, you've got it made.
That's it. That's it. Okay. And I imagine too, reading a lot of chapter books of this kind of style that you want to write will help you internalize how much content should go in each chapter, how much, you know, like I said, one major plot point or a couple scenes. And I imagine you don't want, do you think, and it's probably so instinctive for you right now, but do you think about a chapter should take place in one time period? By time period I mean don't have the chapter start on Monday and end on Friday. It's got
Oh
to,
no, no, I mean it could, but I basically have, like you said, one scene. This
Mhm.
is what happens, and then we move on in the next chapter.
Right, right.
They
And
kind of hopefully flow into the next.
yes, and that's the way a lot of chapter books are paced, very simply like that. Yeah. What about chapter titles? Do you think they're important? Does it?
I think they can be a lot of fun, and I usually get my chapter titles in the chapter as the same as my titles for my books. I usually get them somewhere
Yeah.
in the body of the book. Like Vampires Don't Wear Polka Dots, the title came from something Liza said. She said, Mrs. Jeepers can't be a vampire. Vampires don't wear polka dots. And that's where we
Mhm.
came up with the title.
Mhm. Right. I love how all of the titles in that series have don't, and then in the junior chapter book version, they have do. I love that.
Well, when we were first writing that series, it wasn't a series. It was one book. We sold it. We're like, yay! We sold it. And then we wrote another one and they rejected it. And we rewrote it and they rejected it. But we thought, well, how would people know they were about the same characters? Because it's not a series. So we made the titles similar so that people would know that they were, all about the same kids. And luckily, the third time was the charm, and we sold that second book, and we kept selling more books.
Mhm, mhm. Great, great. I've had a couple questions here on word counts. First of all, do you have a general idea of the word count of the Bailey School Kids books? And then also, you write 3 pages a day. That's your goal. About how many words is that? Do you know?
I'll
It,
tell you, I used Times New Roman, 12-point font, and double spaced, and that's all I know.
okay.
And the Bailey School Kids books are about 42 pages of that 12 uh, point font, Times New Roman, and double spaced.
Mm,
And so I'm not exactly sure of the word
yeah.
count, but that's pretty much what I
I
aim
think
for. And uh, some chapters will be like 2 pages with just a little blurb of the third page. So it's not a um, hard and fast rule, and I don't think most chapter book publishers have a word count per se, um, like you might get with an early reader or easy reader, but they just want you to have a good story.
yes, absolutely, absolutely. Well, and as far as the word count on the page, it depends how much dialogue you have. There's going to be more white space around the dialogue, but I think that 12-point Times New Roman averages to about 220 words a page if you're double spacing. That's sort of average. Just,
And Laura, you had a good point. White space on a page is very important in a chapter book. You don't want a really dense text
right.
because look at that and what they want, you want to see a lot of white space on the page. And dialogue is a really good way to move your story along without having a lot of description, because you don't have a lot of description in a chapter book. You say the classroom, everybody knows what a classroom looks like. And unless there's something really, really strange about this classroom, you probably don't need to describe this classroom at all.
Mm-hmm.
So there's not a lot of description, but there hopefully is a lot of action and a lot of dialogue.
Yes, yes. Okay. And I've had several questions on, should all the chapters be about the same length? I imagine you're hoping that they'll be roughly the same length, the chapters.
Yeah, and if they're not the same length, there should probably be a really dramatic reason, because otherwise, why wouldn't they be?
Yeah.
I think you would want them to be similar length, unless you have like this amazing, wonderful thing happen and you have to just say it in one page, and then that's for dramatic effect or something.
Yes.
But usually, especially in a chapter book level, they're going to expect your chapters to be pretty much the same length, just for the book
Yes. And for kids, again,
book.
there's a pacing thing, and also, again, remember, you're a lot of these kids are new to the longer format, and they need to know they can get through a whole chapter in one sitting, and it might take them 15 minutes to read 3 pages. You just don't know, but it's sort of an expectation the reader has as well, that a chapter is going to be this long and I can do it. So.
Yeah, I think you have a little bit more leeway in middle grade books, and I guess I've done 5 middle grade books, and I've done now it'll be 3 picture books, and all the rest of my 180 books have been chapter books. So I guess I know a little bit more about chapter books than I know about middle grade, but I think you have a little more leeway of chapter length being varied somewhat in a middle grade, but I think you'd want to probably keep them very closely related. Yes. And if you have trouble breaking it down, just try looking for something dramatic in your story. And if you don't have anything dramatic in your story, you want to put something dramatic in your story.
Yes, that is a red flag right there.
Yeah.
Absolutely. What about proper grammar? And you talked about vocabulary early on, 2nd and 3rd grade. Do you worry too much about the word choices, or do you just kind of use your common sense as far as the complexity of the language? And if some of your characters talk in sentence fragments, we don't speak in perfect grammar. Do you worry about that at all?
Well, I've always had a problem with kids maybe my kids don't use perfect grammar, but I don't want them intentionally to use poor grammar. Mm-hmm. If that makes sense. And you probably know which series I'm talking about, but it did very well. So what do I know? But that always bothered me. I think kids should be real, but maybe not so real that for instance, people say what I just said, so you don't want to have your dialogue start every 3rd sentence with, you want your dialogue to be succinct, and you want it to flow well, but you want it to be real, but not too real, if that makes any crazy sense. So you want it to be maybe a little better than real.
That's a good way of putting it. You want to sprinkle those speech patterns here and there, because they are always more obvious on the page than when we're hearing someone talk. So you can put one, per chapter,
If that's, but often I try to make my characters have a speech pattern that's theirs. Mm-hmm. Like Eddie always said, "Holy Toledo." So that might be some character's thing that they always say, you
Mhm.
know.
Mhm.
So, you know, when they're
Right.
speaking.
Yes.
But otherwise, I think keeping it normal and with just, like you said, a sprinkling of some things that make it seem more real. But I don't like to drag the story down with too much realness.
Yeah.
I mean, you want it to be real, but you want it to be better than real. And
Mhm.
I don't know how to put it any other way than we don't talk the way we probably want to read.
Correct. That is a good point. Okay, just a couple more questions. I want to let you go because I know we've run a little long here, but I appreciate your time so much tonight. Is it important to resolve all the story conflicts by the end of the book? No loose
Yes.
threads?
Yes, yes, definitely. I think so. Otherwise, it's just kind of dangling there, unless it's an arc that's going through like a, um, you know, something that you've planned to go through like 4 books or something, and
Sure.
that's your you know your series arc or something.
And we talked about earlier, for say older middle grade and young adult, you could have like a trilogy where there are some unresolved plot threads that carry through the arc of the whole series. But in chapter books in general, I think they are. And also, you don't know what order the kids are going to read these books in. When you
That's always a concern of mine. Like the Bailey School Kids, and I think every series of mine except one, which was the Keyholder series that I wrote with Marcia, you could read them in any order.
Mhm.
And I like that because I, a former librarian, you know, kids comes in looking for book 3 and they can't read book 4 unless they get book 3, which is just no good because they might have to wait months to get book 3 to
Yeah.
come in from the library. So I've always tried to have a standalone story in each book of the series so that they don't have to be read in order.
Mhm.
And you mentioned uh, the type of vocabulary. This series skews a little bit higher vocabulary than like the Bailey School Kids. And the only reason is because I use ocean terminology.
Mm.
Like there's bioluminescence in here. That's the creature that bioluminescent creatures are in this story. And because each of the mermaid tales has a creature that it kind of we learn about through the
Uh-huh.
story. So those that ocean terminology really makes the level of the stories a little bit higher. So they are most of them are closer to 4th grade level
Okay.
than like
But
the Bailey School Kids are more like 3.2 or so.
mhm. But also the vocabulary is understandable within the context of the story. So if it's new words for kids, that's okay. They're learning the vocabulary, but it doesn't confuse them as they're
Hopefully,
reading the book.
hopefully, yeah.
Yeah, which is great. Okay, last question. Do you get a sense when you're at writing conferences, talking to editors, et cetera, that they're looking for new chapter books? And if so, do you have any advice on pitching a new series or any tip for writing a great query letter, anything like that that you can pass on?
Well, I mentioned how I do earlier how I would do a series proposal. If I was new, I would write an entire first book and then a couple of synopsis of additional books, paragraph, and then the outline for that. Well, if I wrote the whole first book, I'd do an outline for the second book.
Mhm.
Um, but that would be how I would do a proposal, as well as writing my query letter, the first paragraph to be a book blurb. So if you read like the book jacket and how it makes the book seem really exciting, that's the way you want your query letter to
Mhm.
read. Uh, what was the rest of your question? I forgot.
Oh, just do you sense that the market is open to more chapter books?
Yeah, I don't think it's as burgeoning, I can't get the word, as it was maybe a few years ago, but actually the short chapter book is more open. I know the series that I have coming out next year, the Mermaid Mini Tales, is part of QUIX with Simon and Schuster. I'm not even sure how to say it. And Branches with Scholastica. That's a fairly
Yes.
new edition. So I think, yeah, that step down, maybe the second grade level of
Mhm.
short chapter books is really up and coming, more
Yes.
so than maybe the older chapter books.
Mhm.
But who knows what's
Yeah.
around the corner. You just have to write what you really, really, really want to write. Like I really, really wanted to write that book about Caitlin Carrico, the picture book, and I put all my passion into it and sent it to Learner, and they changed every word in there.
Oh,
But the idea was still the same. I was
the
still
idea was
excited
great.
about the subject matter.
Oh,
So you have to be open. You have to be
yes.
open to an editor.
Well, and I think the real key toward catching an editor's eye is that interesting hook to your idea, which is in that blurb. Like you said, for your query letter, you write the opening paragraph as if it's a book jacket blurb. And all of your series, we talked at the beginning of this interview, you said first you got to hit kids over the head with this.
Oh,
and, and,
don't
and
quote me on
so,
that.
yeah, not literally, but it's that you have the Bailey School kids at school stories, but there's monsters and vampires, and there's always a character who comes into each story who's not what they seem, and just some little twist is really what I think editors are looking for, because everything has to stand out on the shelf one way or another. So,
And
uh,
yeah, I guess the monsters made it high concept, especially at that time, because there wasn't anything like it
mhm,
at the time. So if you high concept is something that uh, would make a good movie.
yeah, yeah,
So think about it that way. If how could you take a regular um, story and ump it a little bit so that it'll be high concept and more mass appeal. So you take a story of a kid who's walking to school. Well, that kid, what can you do to make it more high concept? You can have aliens. you can have you can have
he takes a wrong
monsters.
turn and suddenly he's in a different time period.
Yeah, you've got to have a twist, something
Yeah,
something to make it unique and different, and
mhm,
something that will appeal to a lot of
sure.
people.
And,
Um,
and you can sum that up in a sentence or two in your query letter, and an editor immediately gets what the concept is, and
yeah,
that's really key. Yeah.
yeah. The and something that's universal is also high concept. Like for kids want to have friends. Kids want their parents to love them. Kids want pets. So those are kind of universal things for kids, and they can be definitely depending on how you work with it, can be high concept.
Right, right. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Debbie. I want everyone to go straight to their bookstore on August 3rd and grab a copy of the graphic novel, brand new graphic novel of Vampires Don't Wear Polka Dots, for every kid in your life. And
I would appreciate it. You can order it now. You can go right now for pre-order right now.
yes. All right. Well, thank you so much, Debbie, for so much of your time and expertise tonight. And we really appreciate you being here with us. It was great to see you. And thank you all for joining us. We
Thanks,
love
Laura.
seeing you too. Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Thanks.
So we'll see you all next week. Have a happy July 4th, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye, Laura. Thanks.
Bye.